Hello everybody. In this video I am going to talk to you about soap carving. This will be an introductory project. The idea of this project is really to just play with the material to learn and explore what it can and what it can't do. This is a process that's known as reductive carving, and it is one of the earliest forms of sculpture that you could find. Traditionally, it is thought of as somebody carving into stone or marble, wood. There used to be carvings in ivory and bone and walnuts and other things like that. There's also non-traditional ways of carving. People have carved into chocolate and soap and butter and ice and foam and other things like that as well. So it's a very traditional process, but it still has many applications today, whether you're interested in using it traditionally or from a more conceptual, idea-based process. Soap is great to start with because it is cheap, inexpensive, fairly lightweight, soft, so it's quick to carve. We don't have to have a lot of expensive or fancy tools, and we don't have to have equipment. It makes a little bit of a mess, but it's not anything that's too terrible to clean up, and I'll talk about that. And one of the other cool things is that, what you generate in scraps from this, you could save and reuse for actual soap. I also did some experimenting and found some videos online and took all my shavings from 2 bars of soap and made it into a larger disc. So I'm going to switch my video over so that it is above. I'll go through some of the tools and then just kind of speed the video through so you can watch me actually making a carving and seeing what that looks like. Before I switch the camera over though, I think it's easiest to just show you this little tray that I've made for myself out of a it was out of a flat piece of cardboard, and I cut the edges halfway through and folded them up and just taped them shut, and then have lined it with some newspaper. You could also line it with plastic and then line it with newspaper, but the newspaper will be great to kind of lift up and dump into your bucket. But this is just kind of a nice way to keep all of the scraps contained because while the soap doesn't make dust, it does make little shavings. So I would recommend that. You could even, if you have an existing cardboard box, just cut that so that you end up with a shallow little tray to kind of work in. So something that you might find useful. Okay, so here is my setup from above. You can see I have my cardboard tray and it's got, 1-inch deep sides, and I've lined it with some newspaper. I've got also like a little yogurt container or just any kind of a little bowl that is great to catch scraps in. And then a variety of materials, tools that I found just in my kitchen, which can work in a pinch if you don't yet have your kit. So some of the things that are useful would be like a steak knife, a butter knife. The reason I like this is because it has serrated edge teeth on it, and this is great for carving and shaving away. I found this little spork that also has those teeth in it, and so those are things that I like in tools for carving. Now I figured a spoon could even work for scooping. It might be an alternative to one of these loop tools. In a pinch, I could use a pencil, mechanical pencil. If you have a utility knife, something like that could certainly work. And so what I encourage you to do is just kind of experiment and play with what you have. Of course, if you purchased a clay tool kit, you'll find some of these tools useful. The loop tools you will find helpful, maybe the needle tool. I certainly will use this rib that comes with the kit. I think I also had suggested that you maybe purchase some version of one of these, which they kind of have a little hook to them, and then an end that's either pointed or slightly less pointy. And I also should say that I usually also, for carving purposes, like some kind of a little paintbrush, so I can brush away the little scraps that happen as you're working. You can also make your own tools if you have a little bit of sandpaper and some kind of a popsicle stick or a tongue depressor, just by shaving different shapes out of those materials. Again, the idea or the name of the game here is just play and experimentation. The other thing to know about carving soap is that when soap kind of is fresh out of the wrapper, it is much softer than when you have it open maybe for 24 or 48 hours. The longer it's out of the wrapper, the sort of more brittle that it becomes. Now that brittleness will take sort of weeks to happen, but I find that sometimes the soap, when it's fresh out of the wrapper, is almost a little too soft for my liking. So I might make big moves when I first take the soap out of the bar, but then I might wait 24 hours before I go to refine that. So sometimes if I know I'm gonna be in a soap carving frenzy or make a demo, I will just unwrap a bar of soap the day before. Something to think about. But everyone has their own preferences. So for this demo, I'm just going to be experimenting and making something abstract, kind of responding to the tools, responding to the form, and thinking about something that is interesting to hold in my hand. I also want to try to make it look like it is not a bar of soap when I am done. So one of the first things that I can do to maybe encourage that or discourage it from looking like a bar of soap is to kind of make some fairly big moves. Maybe just kind of cutting off some big chunks to start out with. I might even want to think about breaking up this flat plane here by making it more of a diagonal. Now, if you are using a knife, please be really careful about where your opposite hand is in relation to the knife that you're cutting. Okay. Since I know this knife is not super sharp, I'm being very gentle and slowly sort of whittling. But I would not at all do this with a utility knife or an X-Acto knife. I just know that this one's a little duller. Even to be safer, because soap is so soft, you could just do that with a butter knife. Now, sometimes I just carve directly over my newspaper, and sometimes I also, to save a little bit of cleaning, will carve directly over that bowl. And yeah, I like this butter knife. This is nice. It's not quite as sharp as using this blade. So first thing is I'm just kind of trying to break up the bar of soap, making it not look like such a flat plane and a rectangle. Maybe I even kind of scoop out a little bit of a curve. Now, again, just sort of playing with some of the other tools. If all you have is a spoon, a butter knife, you can still get a lot done. Now, I'm usually not one to advocate for taking tools out of the kitchen and sculpting with them and putting them back into the kitchen, but this particular project where you're carving into soap would be one where I think you would be okay if you had to snatch a tool out of the kitchen just for this process. But usually it's smartest just to keep those things separate from one another. So as I continue to work, I'm just kind of, again, playing and being responsive and looking and realizing also where I'm getting a little thin, because that's where the soap or whatever you're carving might be prone to break. So I'm getting a little thin right here. And maybe that is my end goal, that this is super thin right here. But before I make that as thin as I would want it to make, I would want to carve these ends a little bit more to get the detail I want so that this isn't quite as fragile. So usually what you're doing when you're carving is you're thinking about the big picture and then slowly working your way down to the detail. You're not starting with the detail. So try not to get obsessed just about one particular area that you're working with. The reason that I like serrated edges is that they can be really useful for carving curves and helping those planes to stay kind of flat. Sometimes if you just use a straight edge without cleaning up the serrated edge. Instead of getting a nice smooth line, you get this like sort of checkered line. So things that have teeth can be useful for helping to knock down the high points and meet the low points for a smooth line. Now that might be something you're interested in, and it might not be. And then you can see I can go back in with the straight edge just to kind of clean that up. So one of the things to sort of know about sculpture, especially when we're working and thinking with reductive carving, is that this is all about the way that light is hitting the object and reflecting off different planes. Now I have a overhead light here that's not allowing for much shadow to come at play, but you can see that this is a little darker here, and it's certainly more highlighted up in this area. So where I have a sort of more distinct break, sort of like a line between two planes, like here or here, you can kind of follow that line and see that these look like two different values. This is like a brighter white and a slightly lighter gray. And that's because I have a kind of edge here. Whereas something like this that is a little bit more rounded, that edge is not as defined. It's sort of more smooth and kind of blended in. So it's got more of a gradation of a shift of value versus something like this where you're kind of seeing two very different values on two kind of different planes. So I would encourage you to think about that. Do you want something that has more of a break in it, or do you want something that's a little more smooth? Do you want a combination of those two things? I'm also feeling the urge to make a negative space in here that goes all the way through the form. So I'm taking this butter knife, twisting it through here, kind of like a drill bit. So again, this is not something that would work if I were carving marble, and that's why I think soap is so fun. It's because you can do these things super fast and super responsive. So now I have a negative space, and I'm thinking about something that's interesting to hold in my hand. And so now maybe I'm realizing that that kind of is a space for my thumb, and maybe that's a space for my pointer finger. Okay, so I'm going to continue to play. I'll probably go silent for a little bit here and just show you some different tools that you can work with, and we'll see where I end up. So for this next portion of the video, I will be skipping ahead through different portions of this piece as I have started carving away at it. You'll notice I will be using a variety of tools. So I started with my large loop tool, and I've moved on to a smaller loop tool. You can notice that I hold the tools differently in my hand depending on the motion that I am working on. This is a little bit of a scooper tool with kind of a more sharp edge. Back to the loop tool, you can use the rounded edge of the loop tool or the squared edge to make sort of more defined cuts. That paintbrush works good for cleaning up areas if you have a lot of little soap scraps that are kind of getting in your way of seeing the overall form. I'm taking away some larger planes with my metal rib. You can see the shape is starting to get smaller and smaller as I work. I want to make another hole. I'm going to use my needle tool to help me see through the form where point A and point B meet, or the front and the back of that hollow. You can use that wooden tool. Those are ones that, again, you could make with a popsicle stick if you had. And as the form starts to get smaller and areas start to get thinner, you also need to be careful about how you are holding it. Eventually the soap could get fragile enough to break. You can see now I have a bit of a figure 8 shape, and I've just been looking at and refining the form as I've been going, sort of responding to what is happening. So I wanted to make it look like it was actually a like sort of twisted rubber band. So I was trying to define each of those individual planes and kind of looking and reevaluating. You can see things are getting more fragile to the point. that they break. So this is one of the parts with reductive carving, is that you can absolutely take your project a little bit too far. And part of the sort of magic of that is that you can just continue to work and build and play and make something out of what you have left. Reductive carving is not necessarily a process where you can just stick those two pieces back together, so you work with what you have. I decided, since this was a little delicate piece and it didn't have a lot of information to it, that what I would start to do is add little details, little bits of texture, the tension in between where the two pieces just barely touch. Cleaning it up, you can see I have lots of sort of bumps and shifts of planes and cuts, and here I even decide maybe to make a couple extra marks using my thumbnail as a tool. And then clean up, which is pretty quick, especially if you have some newspaper down. So I hope you have found this video useful in sort of thinking about how to play with different materials, how to sort of think into and through a form, and come up with your own soap carving.